Ooh, let's see if everything works out now. Tick, 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 tick. Okay, looks like we're live now, and it's gonna stay live. Correct? Correct. Okay. Hopefully this thing goes off without a hitch. We had some technical difficulties last night. If you tried to tune in, she did not want to go live. I read for about an hour and it didn't broadcast. So just checking things over, making everything's cool. And it looks to be that we are. So I'm happy. We're about 40 seconds into this. Yeah. And I feel pretty happy. So, good evening, everybody. We're here on, I believe it's night four. Yeah, night four of the live reading for my latest book, Pavor Nocturnus, which is Latin for night terrors. Um, the book's going to be released on Halloween, October 31st, and you can get it at Amazon.com. As I mentioned last night, there's about 4 or 5 other books named Pavor Nocturnus. Go figure. Mine is the cool one that's written. Just look for my last name for the author on it on Amazon. It'll be available in paperback and also on Kindle. Been doing these live readings since Thursday, trying to get through the whole book. We've got tomorrow, which will be chapters 8 and 9, and then Tuesday, Halloween night, it'll be chapter 10, which kind of wraps all of these stories up. So if you've been following along or you've been watching them later on YouTube, I try to have them posted up there in order so you can follow along. It does help to be reading all of these books before you read, or all of these chapters before you read chapter 10. Chapter 10 kind of wraps all of them up. So, basically, if you are just joining us, you're wondering what the heck this book's about, or why I'm coming up with all these weird stories. What I did was I sent out a request for nightmares. Thanks, Sheila. Thanks, Steph. I sent out requests for people to send me their nightmares, just little snippets, and they send them to me. I look them over, and then I kind of add details, and then I come up with a story. Some of these were really easy to start pumping a story out of them, and some of them were really hard. Tonight, one of tonight's was probably one of the hardest ones for me to write. It's from a friend of mine's kid, Felix, and he wrote me 3 fairly at length nightmares that he had, and I was going to pick one of them, and I ended up kind of mixing the 3 of them together. The first dream that he sent me was they were in a loop, and they kept living the same day over and over again in this strange type of school, and they couldn't escape. The second dream they sent me was they were at a hospital type place in some nightmarish city with their mom and sister, and the walls would sometimes be made of flesh, and people there were weird looking, and they moved super fast, and when thrown through the window, they were turned into rag dolls. And the third one was a zombie apocalypse type scenario where soldiers come and kind of shoot up their survivor camp. So I mixed the 3 of those stories together, and I came up with The New Flesh, which is the title of tonight's first story. And we'll just get it kicked off here. Oh, thank you, by the way, to all the feedback I've gotten from you guys um, in the last few days here. It's pretty encouraging. Like I said, I'm not really writing to become the next Stephen King or Clive Barker or whatever. It'd be nice, but yeah, I just kind of like to tell stories, and if you enjoy them, please let me know. It helps keep me going. So, without any further babbling on, let's kick it in here with the new flesh. Let me take a swallow of coffee first here. Grief is a funny thing, you know? You take for granted the fact that the ones that you love are just as fragile as the next person. Then in a brief, terrible moment, they're gone. You try to remember their faces, the things you did together, and the things that they said, and then they're gone in a puff of smoke. And you're left with the most unfillable emptiness. Dad was the first to go. "None of you," he said with such a sorrowful voice, it makes me cry just to remember it. "None of you understand me." He was packing his duffel bag, and Mom was trying to calm him down. None of us knew how impossible that was going to be, because we didn't know about the virus. Not then, and not for another year at least. He was a solid father. He taught me what it was to be a man. None of that machismo bullshit. He taught me to have power over my emotions. They were okay to have if it didn't let them take control of me. He said to respect women and to treat them like partners. If I had happened to find a special someone. He was my rock, yet here he was falling apart. I'd never seen him like this, and to be honest, I can't even remember what started the emotional outburst. We were all in the family room watching Netflix when Dad came downstairs, screaming his head off. He looked drenched in sweat, and his eyes were bloodshot. He grabbed a painting off the wall and threw it into the flat screen we were watching. My little sister, Willa, had jumped behind Mom. Mom was not one to put up with violence of any kind, but she did believe in giving Dad a chance to explain himself. And that was the problem. He couldn't. This virus broke down something in your brain, and the first signs are fever and irrational behavior. "I'm trying to understand you, John," Mom had said, trying to stand between him and us kids. "But you know better than to start throwing things around the house and screaming at the top of your lungs. We can talk about it." "Fuck talking about it," he screamed in her face, "and fuck you." "Get out," she said as calmly as she could. "You're right, you need to leave. We'll figure everything else out later." But there was no later. Mom had to figure it out on her own. We never saw Dad again. Well, not our dad. I'd like to think he's in one of those camps, the ones where the government tries to cure you of the virus. Maybe he's sitting happily in a cot, not aware that his family is somewhere out there, fending for themselves in this apocalyptic hell. I have mixed emotions about that, but my emotions are in check. The Nocturnus virus was rumored to come out of Antarctica, but nobody really knew the truth. People were calling it the Hannibal flu, because eventually it caused its host to bite and sometimes eat others. There were stages to the sickness. 1, high fever. 2, elevated blood pressure. 3, extreme irritation. 4, vomiting. And 5, biting or eating other living flesh. There was no cure once the patient got to the vomiting stage. Those people were euthanized. The others were taken to camps, which were rumored to be worse than the world out here. It wasn't really rehabilitation, but experiments. Those were the stories that were told by those that had claimed to see the other side. When the pandemic broke out and ravaged the population, humanity was scattered. Some wanted the safety of the government was offering and moved into the fortresses that were set up in the bigger cities. Others, like Mom, Willa, and myself, fended for ourselves in the abandoned outskirts. We relied on the kindness of strangers, which in most situations was non-existent. But we had each other, and I trusted Mom's judgment of people. We hid out at a base that was once the Weta Indian Reservation, that sat hidden away in the jagged spires of the Badlands. White Creek bordered the little area, with spires guarding the north border. There were trail cams along the creek bank and in the canyon beyond. We had early warning systems that kept 18 of us feeling as safe as we could. Sometimes I wondered if Dad was somewhere out there, worried about us. Maybe this virus was a hoax, and he was just upset about some untold argument between him and Mom. It made me feel good to tell myself this lie, and it kept me going this far. Since I was the oldest, I got to go on scouting missions. We would go into formerly populated areas like Keystone or even Sturgis and scavenge supplies. We would sometimes run into the infected, and we'd have to shoot to kill. I thought very briefly about what would happen if I saw Dad out there, if I could shoot him. But so far, I hadn't had to kill anyone or anything. Oddly enough, the infected weren't as scary as the other people who were also trying to survive. The infected only wanted to eat or spread whatever nastiness was in their bodies to others. The other survivalists had reasoning, cruelty, and opportunism. They would stop at nothing to get what they wanted, even if that something was sex. There were rumors of rape gangs, but we were fortunate enough not to run into any of those yet. There were stories about what was happening inside the government zones, too, that were horrendous. I had heard from Cole Aberdeen that some of the experiments were to turn people into living flesh dolls. They had developed a synthetic skin from mutated cancer cells, and they would graft these things onto your former skin and would turn you into some kind of maniacal living mannequin. But again, these were rumors that were told from person to person, and you know how that goes. I mean, look at organized religion. All that dogma and scripture is rooted in centuries of oral history. Some guy looking for a spiritual awakening in the desert, he eats a mushroom, boom, he's talking to flaming bushes. Or a shining light from the sky, and alakazam, you've created religion. Sorry, a soapbox moment. Growing up, going to church, and then living out the rest of my life in this apocalypse has made me a bitter Catholic. Enough on that. Life on the res was hard. When this piece of land was populated by the First Nations people, it was rough. Add in infected people who wanted to chew on you like bubblegum, and desperados willing to let their animal instincts kick in, made it worse. Then the soldiers, faceless robotic humans who were constantly on the hunt to liberate survival colonies. It made it that much harder. Everything we did had to be done in silence and away from the prying eyes of scouts or drones. Some of the younger members of our group didn't even know how to talk and would use sign language instead. We wore moccasins to move silently, and some of us were barefoot. It was amazing to me how fast we all adapted to this lifestyle. There was no technology for us out here. No internet, cell phones, no Xbox, no electricity. Not even running water, unless you counted the gravity system one of our group had set up. We used stealth weapons like knives and bow and arrows, spears and slingshots. My sister Willa had become quite a silent warrior. She hadn't had to kill anything or anyone, but she could move about stealthily and took into sign language like a second nature. It made me a little sad because I forgot what her voice sounded like. Kind of like how I forgot what Dad's laugh sounded like. But then, now I'll never know. Willa liked to climb the spires, and she used an old pair of binoculars to look around at the land around us. It was a routine thing she did. She was sure-footed and stealthy. Mom had faith that everything would be okay if she were to wander on her own like that. I was uneasy about it, but I'm the big brother, and that's what we do. To protect ourselves from being spotted by government drones, we wore beige capes. When a drone was spotted overhead, or it was heard, we would lay down and cover ourselves with these capes. It was a solid camouflage from the air, and we were 100% undetectable. What we didn't expect, what Willa didn't expect, was detection from both sides. She had stumbled upon a group of infected people. They didn't spot her, so she was able to climb away from them without being detected. The only problem was there was a surveillance drone just on the other side of the rise she was climbing. It centered in on her, and an alarm went off, screeching and echoing off the canyon walls. It alerted the infected that food was near and was feeding coordinates to the nearby rehabilitation team. "Oh, shit," Mom said. "Where's Willa?" "I'm not sure." I was just as alarmed as her, and I couldn't use my binoculars because Willa had them. "I'll go check up on the spires." "No, take shelter. I'll go look. I'm not losing 2 kids in one day." I wanted to argue, but Mom had already made it halfway up the spires. I ran into a hole we had hidden under a facade. I could barely hear Mom calling Willa through the high-pitched whine of the drone alarm. Suddenly, there were gunshots. The rehabs were nearby, and now there was going to be a firefight, possibly with the group of infected going after Willa, possibly with Mom. More than likely, a little bit of both. The others in our camp were scrambling. Somehow the infected got into our camp and were attacking us. I could hear triumphant growls and others screaming. I was hoping Mom and Willa were safe. I wanted to peek to look, but I also didn't want to give away my position. The screaming, gunfire, and growling were suddenly in chorus with one another, and I thought I'd go mad from it all. Then it began to peter out. Stray gunshots, booming as an afterthought. Coughing and weeping somewhere in the distance. It was over. I could hear the trampling of boots in unison. They stopped in the middle of our encampment. A mechanized voice called out, "Attention, citizens! We have been sent by your government to liberate you. You no longer need to hide. We can bring you to safety. We can heal your sick. We can feed your hungry." "Or they'll kill you if you refuse," yelled a familiar voice. It was Mom. It sounded as if she were in danger. I heard something crack and Mom yelp in pain. "That is a false narrative. We have secured and liberated your cities. They are safe. Thousands of your fellow citizens now live in these cities free of fear." "These are lies. Don't listen to them." There was a gunshot. It echoed off the spires, and suddenly I heard Mom loud and clear. "Willa!" I broke cover. I had a wrist rocket filled with ball bearings. Before me was a line of soldiers standing at attention behind my mother. She was on her knees, cradling my sister's lifeless body in her arms, crying. I wasn't sure if the ball bearings would puncture the soldier's armor, but I was going to try. I pulled back the rubber tubing of my wrist rocket as far back as my arms would allow. My fingers were shaking as I held the ball bearings in my thumb and index. I aimed at the soldier holding the smoldering gun and let it rip. The 2 ball bearings hissed through the air and made loud tapping noises as they ricocheted off the soldier's helmet. "Take her," he said, pointing at me. "Go through this encampment and make sure no stone is left unturned." This part is a little blurry. I believe I was tasered at this point, and things went black after that. When I came to, my vision was blurry. I think I may have been drugged, but I wasn't sure. I had a heck of a headache and then became alarmed as I felt fingers stroke my hair. "Who the—" I jerked. "It's okay, honey." It was Mom's voice. My head was in her lap. I sat up and rubbed my eyes and looked as if we were in a hospital of some sort. The walls were painted a dark red and the lights above were a little too bright. Next to us lay my sister on a metal table. "Willa!" I began to cry. The soldiers had shot her in the head. I couldn't bear to look at her. "This is my fault, Felix," she said glumly. "If I would have complied, they would not have shot her. This is on me." "No!" I stood up. "They should have just left us alone. They have no right to bring us here. Where are we?" "Rapid City by the looks of it outside. I think we're in some kind of hospital right now." "Did they leave Willa out here for you to wallow in guilt?" "Rightfully so. I think you should stop your aggression. It leads to death, son." "Well, fuck that!" An elevator opened before us. A mechanical voice came over the intercom. "Welcome to the American Rehabilitation Center, Rapid City. Please step into the elevator before you." "I don't trust it," I spoke. "Come on, Felix." Mom sounded defeated, and that tore at my heart. "Please do not be alarmed. You have been brought here to be analyzed and re-educated. If a vaccine is needed, we will administer. Please step into the elevator." We stepped in. The doors slid closed, and I heard air pressure being released. Then a plume of steam began to fill the car. "Do not be alarmed. You are being bathed in medicated steam to disinfect any harmful particles that may have attached themselves to you. The procedure is harmless." Mom and I were covered in sweat, and then the blowers dried us off and sucked out the medicated steam. Then a series of red laser lights began to scan us. "Subject, Jennifer Josie Kellerman, aged 51 years. Last known residence, 3221 Blakely Street, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Scanning. Subject is clean." "Subject, Felix John Kellerman, aged 17 years. Last known residence, 3221 Blakely Street, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Scanning. Subject is clean." The elevator stopped and the doors hissed open. Beyond it was a long hallway with the same dark red walls. A conveyor belt hummed forward to a double door at the end of the hall. "Please step out onto the conveyor. This will be bringing you to central processing." "What have you done with my sister?" I shouted. There was a moment of silence. "Please step out onto the conveyor. This will bring you to central processing." "We ain't moving until you tell me what's happening with my sister." "Felix, please," Mom said, grabbing my arm, and I shrugged her off. "Subject, Willa June Kellerman, aged 14 years. Subject, deceased. She will be processed with the others who were liberated." "Liberated?" I said angrily. "You mean killed?" "Son, you're going to get us." "Please step onto the conveyor. This will bring you to central processing. Any deviation will be considered an act of aggression, and you will be liberated." We stepped onto the conveyor. It jerked us a few times, and we had to hold on to each other so we wouldn't fall. When we got to the double doors, I heard the lock disengage and the doors opened automatically. The conveyor belt came to a stop. The room was dark except for the spotlight that was shown above us, and the light from the giant glass windows that surrounded a long table with what seemed like human shapes sitting around it. "Welcome to Central Processing. Please remain on the conveyor until instructed to do otherwise. Thank you for your compliance." "Good evening, citizens," a voice came from the darkness. It had that fake ad man tone to it. I think it was one of the shapes we could see silhouetted at the table. "My name is Mr. Hamner, and these are my colleagues, Mrs. Calvin, Mr. Drist, and Miss Simon. Please welcome. We welcome you back to society." "Society?" I spat. "I consider this kidnapping." "Ah, the young, full of vigor and life." Why don't you let us go? We don't want to be here. Is this true, Mrs. Kellerman? Mom stood there silently for a moment. I squeezed her hand, hoping she'd speak up in that strong, rebellious voice I've known my whole entire life. We want to be here, she spoke. Mom! I was shocked. It sounds like your son disagrees with you, Mr. Hamner said. He can be strong-willed at times. Yes, we can see that, but that's okay. We have a re-education program that can help him reintegrate into society again. Being so young through a pandemic, it's very understandable that one would be so hesitant to come back to civilized life. As for you, Mrs. Kellerman, please step over to our recalibration table. Lights turned on over what looked like a wall made completely out of skin. There were red veins laced all through it, and it seemed to pulsate. Mom looked hesitantly at the apparatus and then at me. It's okay, honey. It was Dad. He was covered in this new flesh. His face all doughy with tiny pupils and a pudgy smile that seemed to defy the weight of his face. His voice was like an old-time radio announcer trying to sell you Lifebuoy soap. John? Mom asked. Is that really you? Yes, honey. It's okay. It's safe. Join me. You'll see. Mom slowly stood up. Mom, I said, grabbing her arm. What are you doing? She broke my hold on her and then hugged me and placed a kiss on my forehead. Mom, please, don't. She walked over to the wall of flesh and stood before it. Place your feet on the foot pattern before you. She did. The wall moved towards her and stopped just short of her face. There were clicking noises and whirring sounds coming from above and below her. Don't be afraid, Jen, Dad's lifeless smile said. He placed his pudgy hand on her shoulder. Join me. Join society again. I have missed you so much. Felix? She said, looking back at me with a hint of fear on her face. Then the wall enveloped her entire body. She was encased in this sheet of flesh. I could see her struggle, and I cried out. Relax, boy, Mr. Hamner said. Your mother is being changed so that she can withstand any exposure to the virus. We're helping her. You're killing her, I shouted. Dad, stop this. It's gonna be okay, kiddo, he said. Soon you'll join us too. We can be one big happy family again. How could you? What about Willa? Who's Willa? I heard shuffling, footfalls that clicked and clacked so rapidly it seemed impossible. Before me stood one of the people that were sitting at the long table. She had long blonde hair that surrounded what resembled the face of a Cabbage Patch doll. Her head was round and puffy with the new flesh, her eyes sunken into it like two raisins. She had a hideous smile that stretched from her left temple to her right. She slapped me before I could absorb what I was seeing. I fell to the floor but was able to stand up again and tackle her. The touch of her skin was revolting. It felt as if there were other things crawling around underneath it. When we were both able to stand up again, she came at me at that nightmarish speed. But I was able to pivot enough to use her inertia against her, and she sailed through one of the giant windows. Glass buckled and exploded as she broke through and plummeted to the ground below. Two others raced up to me, and before I could throw a punch or kick, one of them injected me with something, and my knees gave out. The last thing I saw was Mom writhing in that horrible flesh cocoon. So that brings us here, the American Re-Education Facility. I don't know how long I've been here. Time is not fluid here. I suspect this is due to drug interference. There are other kids here of various ages. We are all in uniforms that are the same dark red that those walls in the processing center were. The building, as far as I can deduce, is perfectly square. I'm guessing about 4 stories high, but I can't be sure because the doors here do not always open to the same space. I know, that sounds confusing. Trust me, I know. But there are no staircases going up or down, even though when I look out the classroom windows sometimes, I'm high off the ground, and other times I'm garden level. I don't feel that we rest. We are just constantly going to class. If not a classroom, then we're led to a giant theater and shown movies. But the movies only project pictures when you look straight at them, not when your head is turned away. There are no adults except for the staff. They are all covered in that new flesh that my mother was engulfed in. I cannot bear to look at any of them in that little raisin-like eyes of theirs. I think I would go mad if I did. They move impossibly fast, and their strength is tenfold of what a normal human was. I watched a teacher throw my friend Max through the wall. There's only one door that leads outside, and it only goes into the courtyard, a serene park that is surrounded by the dark red brick of this building. I wonder where Mom is, and what they've done with my sister's body. I think those 2 things and the faint memory of my father are the only things that keep me alert. I go through the motions, do what I'm told mostly, but the fire inside me to resist is still there, burning a hole in my guts. "You'll never get out of here," a blonde girl of about 14 says to me. She is dressed in a green outfit, and I notice that none of us in this class is wearing that color. We're all in that dark blood clot crimson color. "Most of you won't. You aren't compliant." Who the fuck are you? Who the fuck asked you?" I snapped. She acted so pious with her green form-fitting uniform, long blonde hair and deep green eyes to match. She wore the most hideous eyeshadow I'd ever seen on a face. "Exactly," she sneered. "That sort of attitude won't get you back into society." Well, who said I want to enter society? Walk around with fake smiles encased in that grotesque skin suit? I find it beautiful. Well, you would. The bell began. The bell rang, and it was time for the next class to start. She stood up and placed her hand on my desk. She looked into my eyes and whispered, "There are more ways to escape than you know," she said, and walked out. I looked down at my books, and next to them, she had left a note. "Sit next to me in the theater." The mixed message made me even more confused than I already was. I stood up and headed out the door to the theater. The theater was set up with stadium seating, a thick velvet curtain, the same color as everything else, hung about around the room. She was in the 5th row, staring straight ahead. I slowly made my way to her, trying hard not to make it look obvious that I was looking for her, or that I was purposely sitting by her. On the right side of the row, from her to the aisle, were kids in green uniforms like her. Scattered about to the left were kids like me, pale-faced and clotted in blood-colored, oversized jumpsuits. "Sit with your own kind," she said loudly. "What?" I looked shocked. "Did you want me to sit with you or not?" "Me and my group have worked hard to get this level." She was standing now and throwing a tantrum. "Your filth should be sitting in the back rows." 2 of those puffy-faced ushers scrambled over to us faster than I could react. "What's the problem, child?" one of them asked through a too-many-toothed grin. "I refuse to sit by this filth," she announced. "They are beneath me." "To be one with society, one must learn to ignore differences and celebrate your commonalities." But the 2 ushers pulled out what looked like pen lights. The ends of them glowed a horrible green color. "Comply, child, or you will be dropped a level." Their voices were soft but threatening. The blonde girl huffed in many directions. The blonde girl huffed in my direction and then sat down, folding her arms. When the ushers returned to their post, I leaned over and whispered to her, "What the fuck is your issue?" "Play along," she said, staring straight ahead. "We must all play a part." I turned my attention forward, and the giant curtains began to pull back. Images began to dance on the screen. They didn't even seem to mean anything. They were random, and the characters' faces were blurred out. "Don't stare directly at the screen," she whispered. "The images are only a facade. They are programming us through subliminal signals being broadcast behind them." I suspected she was telling the truth. When I turned my head, I felt as if I was being pulled out of a lucid dream. "Don't turn your head," she spoke again. "Just redirect your eyes to the corners of the screen." When I did that, the screen looked like it was filled with static, like a television station had just gone off the air. "We're playing the same game, you and me, but you are going about it all wrong. The more you act compliant, the less suspicion you draw towards yourself." Now I understood what she was doing. "After this movie is complete, follow me, but don't let it look like you're following me. Can you do that?" "I think so," I spoke. "Not good enough. You must do your best. They'll catch on otherwise, and then we'll be punished." "You'll be punished. I'm at the lowest of the low." "There are worse things than being a level 1, trust me." The thought of that frightened me a bit. I did my best to stare at the corner of the screen. We didn't speak again until after the film was over. It seemed to take hours, but there were no clocks or watches here. The only thing dividing time were those bells. When the film finished, everyone got up and walked out of the theater single file. No words passed between anyone. The ushers stared blankly at us as we shuffled past. Back out into the hall, I kept 25 feet from my new blonde compatriot. She had stopped a few times to have shallow conversations with the other green-garbed students. Then she moved on to a door. She looked briefly at me and then went in. After a few minutes, I walked through the same door. It was a courtyard. The sky was an electric blue filled with clouds that looked as if they were painted or airbrushed onto a canvas. There was a light source from somewhere that could have been the sun, but it didn't give off any heat. It also did not shine like the sun did when we were out on the res. The blonde girl was sitting on a cement bench pulling out what looked like a bag of soup packed into a Ziploc. I walked to the bench that sat back to back with hers, and we were separated by shrubs. "That your lunch?" I asked. "Yes," she said, looking in my direction. "This is the new food we're given to get us used to what will be our new way of eating." "New way of eating?" "Look in your pocket." I did. Within was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that was cut into several squares. "Reds get what used to be normal food," she said. "When you make your way to green, your food will be partially liquefied." "How many levels are there?" 3. At least, that's all I've seen. It's hard to tell because so many people come and go from here. But I believe there's red, which you are, then green, which is what I am. Finally, there's blue. When you're blue, you receive the paste for nourishment. Shortly after that, you receive the new flesh, and you can join society. Well, that's just fucked up. None of us know this is happening. For the most part, I think they drug us or hypnotize us. It causes hallucinations and it makes time stand still. Sometimes it goes backwards. I don't know if I can believe all this. How have you not been affected? Somehow, they have us in a loop. Some of us notice this and we try to fight the system. But they catch on and we're taken out of this, whatever this is, and we are restarted. You're confusing the hell out of me. It's actually very simple. We've had this conversation several times, lived out the same scenarios repeatedly. Then You get us caught, and we are reset again. How did you... There's a blue named 10. He's the one that started figuring out the system. He was able to fake his way through it. He taught me what I know, and that's how I've made it to green. How do I talk to this 10 guy? Don't really know. He just shows up from time to time. Sometimes he's red like you, sometimes he's green, and sometimes blue. It's even been said he showed up in stripes, but I find that hard to believe. The staff here are very vigilant. Does he know how to get out of here? What does that mean exactly? Do you want to join society, or do you want to go back out into the wasteland? I want to... Subject green! It was that metallic voice again. Everyone around us panicked and covered their heads. Identified, Carol Louise Bennett, age 16 years. You are to remain still until a chaperone comes to you. Subject, red, identified, Felix John Kellerman, age 17 years. Do not attempt to flee. A chaperone is being sent to your location. I looked at Carol and she at me. I was going to make a run for it. It had to be very soon because the adults around here seemed to move very quickly. She shook her head at me and mouthed, no. One of those pen lights with glowing green tips sailed into her head, and her body straightened out and her eyes rolled up into her head. She only stood there, paralyzed, with only her hands shaking at her sides. I heard a hiss in the air, and by sheer luck, I was able to move just in time before one of those darts stuck in me and turned me into some paralytic mannequin. I darted for the only door that exited the courtyard. One of those chaperones caught up to me before I could reach the handle. It slapped me and I was off my feet, and then it caught me in midair and hurled me back into the courtyard. I landed hard on my back, knocking the wind from my lungs. The chaperone raced over to my convulsing body and lifted me up again. Another chaperone was holding the door open. With a spin and a heave, I was launched through the doorway. I braced for the impact into a set of lockers or a wall or even another person. But none of that happened. I was hurled into darkness, and for what seemed like infinity, I just spun there in the air. There was a rushing sound like a chorus of crickets and frogs, and then I was in class again. There were 5 of us. Sitting next to me was the blonde girl. I think her name was Carrie or Cleo or something. She was dressed in an oversized jumpsuit that was blood red like my own. She wore an even deeper shade of red eyeshadow. She looked at me reproachfully. "Hey!" someone shouted in the class. "It's 10! He's here!" I looked over towards the door, and for a brief moment, I saw a boy running into the hallway. He was wearing a striped sweater. I got up to investigate the hallway, and the teacher walked in. He looked familiar to me, but I felt so dazed and groggy I couldn't put my finger on his identity. "You'll never get out of here," said the blonde girl, looking me up and down. "Most of you won't." "Who the fuck asked you?" I said to her. "Let's calm down, class," the teacher said, his face puffy like all the others. 2 tiny black orbs stared blankly from deep-set sockets in the folds of his flesh. A grin pulled strenuously across his doughy face. I recognized the haircut. The build was a little different. It was plump, but it was my father. It wasn't his voice exactly, but it was him, or what used to be him. "Exactly," the blonde girl said. "That sort of attitude won't get you back into society." It was happening again, only this time I was aware. I don't know how they were doing it, but I was looping through the same day repeatedly. Perhaps this time I can change it. Maybe, if I could remember the choices I made and the things I've said, I can do this all differently. Maybe. And that ends, for now, that ends the story of the new flesh. So thank you for Felix for that one. and pretty descriptive prompts that he sent me. The next one comes from a friend of mine, Dean, and his dream was it was a recurring dream where a girlfriend and him were walking around in this oasis, and a lion attacked her, and he kept going through this in his head if he would have done something different and saved her life. And this one is called Love or Lions. Dean! He awoke again, covered in cold sweat, her voice echoing in his head. He was out of breath when he sat straight up in bed. He looked to his left, and Stacy was still not there. There was a lump of guilt that had been eating away at him since the day of their trip. A myriad of colors exploded in his head, bright electric colors that hurt his eyes to see their true depth. A sharp pain stabbed into the center of his forehead, and then it would leave as fast as it showed up. He shook a Marlboro Light from its package and popped it into his lips. He snapped his Zippo, and the cherry glowed and popped as he took a deep drag. He exhaled and stood up from his bed and walked into the kitchen of their Minneapolis apartment to make a pot of coffee. Enjoying that first bitter sip, he looked out the window, watching the ocean of people move around outside like ants preparing for a coming storm. Maybe, he thought to himself, maybe she's out there. Maybe she's in class right now, wowing the professors at Hamlin University. She was an uber intelligent and was looking at going to MIT after the semester, a move they had planned to make together. Scratch that. It was something she had planned. She was beautiful, caring, loyal, and damn near perfect in every way possible. She loved him deeply, but not how a woman loves a man, but how a fan loves a rock star. He wasn't in the same boat. He liked her a lot, but he wasn't in love with her. He didn't have the heart to tell her either. But here they were, several years later, when a relationship turns into the both of them being furniture to one another, and because it's comfortable. They haven't done anything to rectify this great Sargasso Sea that was building between them. That was until he brought mushrooms to the table. I don't know, Dean, she said, looking at the purple fungus before her. He doesn't look safe at all. Where did you say you got it? It's safe, Dean said, getting annoyed. I got it from Subby. He's fucking majors in chemistry. I'm sure he's not going to give us something that's going to damage us. Sebastian? Has he tried it? Yes, he's tried it. He said do it with someone you trust. He also said something about setting your intentions before you trip. What the hell does that mean? Dean let out a long, sarcastic sigh. It works on your thought processes as you begin your trip. If you're thinking of something negative, it's going to be a negative trip. If you think of something positive, it'll be a great trip. I still don't know. Come on. It's just you and me. We'll jam the door shut to make sure we don't wander off, okay? Okay, I guess. And that was a few days ago. She's still not here. He thought about calling his friend Sebastian and asking him for help, but he didn't know how to put it into words what happened. So he just keeps going back, hoping to reset the events and bring her back. There were 3 mushrooms left. Fuck, he said to himself. Okay, Stacy, I'm going to try this again. This time, I'm not going to run. This time, I'm going to fucking save you. There was an 11 by 18 oil painting of an oasis in the middle of the desert. On it were printed the words, "Maybe hallucinations are just another reality we don't see most of the time." It was a quote by American author Lynn Ewing. They used this painting as a focal point when they took their mushrooms. The mushroom was plump with a powdery purple tint to them. He wasn't sure if the color was flaking off like spores, or if it was because he had been seeing trails and flares since the mushroom he first ingested. He bit down onto the spongy dome, and those intense colors began to flood his vision again. He opened his eyes, and rainbows were pouring from every light source around him. A dull ache hit the center of his forehead, and he felt a rush of hot air, and then he was lying in yellow sand. He knew that sand wasn't really yellow, it was more beige, but the artist that painted this painting he was lying in had brushed it in canary yellow. "Stand up, silly." Stacy grinned at him and offered her hand. "Stacy?" he said with some sadness in the back of his throat. "Come on, you were so right about this stuff. It's amazing." There were stone steps that led to the oasis. A thick grove of palm trees surrounded an electric blue pond. Stacy, like the time before, had walked ahead. "Oh, God," he thought. "She already started up that trail." "Honey," he shouted, "wait up!" She spun around and smiled at him. "Come on, slowpoke. Please, don't go up there." She stopped in her tracks. She stood. She looked back at him again, this time looking annoyed. "Dean, this was your idea. Now come on, let's do some exploring." He tried to climb the incline to where she was, and the sand kept sucking his feet in. "God damn it," he said out loud. "God damn it." "What were your intentions going in?" his mind asked him. "I wanted to have some of that magic back from when we started out." "Was it really magic? Let's be honest with each other, Dean. You were just amused to have someone act so crazy around you." "Ouch. That's a little harsh. But it's the truth." "Fair enough, fair enough. Now, can we manage our way out of this sand so I can stop her before... What were your intentions going in before you went in?" "To enjoy something together again, to..." "Stop, just stop it. I'm the last person you should be lying to." I'm not lying. Let's just get to her before..." "What were your intentions before going in?" "Stacy!" Dean had made it to the first stone paver and made a conscious effort to avoid stepping in any sand. She was 100 yards away from him. Just on the first bend of the path, he knew what was coming. He picked up his pace. "This is what you wanted." No, it wasn't, you son of a bitch. This isn't what I..." "Stacy!" Like twice before, and now again, he knew seconds before it happened. She had turned around and stood there with her hands on her hips. She looked impatiently at him. "Hurry up, Dean. It's beautiful over..." The lion broke cover from a patch of tall ferns and leapt on top of her. They both crashed to the ground. Stacy sat up dazed, looking completely confused. "Dean?" she said incredulously. The lion stood up on all fours and leapt again on her, with its fangs bearing down on her head and claws stretching out from its paws. "Dean?" It bit down on her, swinging her from side to side, like a dog that has a hold of a knotted rope. Stacy's scream was abruptly cut off when she landed harshly on the sand, and the wind was knocked from her lungs. "Stacy!" Dean screamed for her, feeling helpless. With each toss, her body was more and more like a rag doll. The lion pinned her on the ground with its giant paw and then twisted its head just slightly enough to snap Stacy's neck. "D..." was all she was able to shout, and then she was no more. Dean kneeled on the stone paver and lowered his head and wept. He didn't notice that the lion had finished its meal with Stacy and was looking at him, crouched low. It began to slowly make its way towards him. "Your intention was to put an end to this sham of a relationship you had with Stacy." His mind was still dogging him. "Jesus fuck, can you let up?" Dean said under his breath. This time around, your guilt is gonna get the better of you. Of us. What are you talking about? The lion pounced, ran. The lion pounced and ran headlong into Dean's body, carrying him back down the incline, and they both rolled across the sand. "Oh, shit!" Dean said, with his eyes wide. The lion roared, and Dean could feel it deep in his bones. It swatted one of its giant paws in his direction, and he rolled out of the way. The lion growled in annoyance. If you don't let go of this guilt," his mind said, "that thing is gonna kill us." "Again," Dean spat. "This is all my fault." "Don't be a martyr. Just get us the fuck out of here." "I don't know what to..." The lion sliced him from shoulder to shoulder. He fell, but was able to roll out of another barrage of attacks. "Stick your finger down your throat." "What?" "Stick your finger down your throat. Maybe that will get us out of here." "That's ridiculous. Puking isn't going to..." "Stick your goddamn finger down your throat. For fuck's sakes. We're about to become... Duck!" The lion had dived at him again, hoping to tackle Dean again and perhaps pin him under its weight. He was able to duck, and the lion flew over him. He ran up the hill, this time with no issues, and made it to the bank of the watering hole. "Now, what the fuck are you doing? You're not going to jump in there, are you? What if there's crocodiles in there, or worse yet, piranhas?" "There isn't. There can't be. This water represents peace and tranquility. It has to." "I don't know, Dean. I just don't..." "Ah, shit." He splashed into the watering hole, crystal clear and cool. As he rose to the surface of the water, he opened his eyes. And he was in their studio apartment again. He was soaked, and when he looked at the bed sheets, he saw that there were blood stains. He walked into the bathroom and looked at his back in the mirror. There were deep lacerations across his back, from shoulder blade to shoulder blade. That explosion of intense color in his head happened again, and he fell onto the floor. It felt like there was an ice pick in the center of his forehead. "Oh, Jesus, fuck," he cried out. Then he sat there in utter silence. There was no roar, no growls, and best of all, his mind had shut the fuck up. The colors disappeared, and he popped another Marlboro into his mouth and smoked it like it was the last cigarette on earth. He then picked up his phone and dialed his friend Sebastian. "Hey, what up, Deanster?" His friend answered, stoned as usual. Dean believed the only reason he attended college was to be able to create mind-altering drugs. "Fuck, subby." Dean tried to find the words. "I'm in trouble." "The cops bust you, man?" I told you to forget. You know me. If the cops..." "It's not the cops. Fuck, just listen to me, okay?" "Did Stacy OD?" "Bro, Narcan ain't gonna help you there." "She didn't OD. It's worse. A lot fucking worse. She's fucking gone." There was silence on the other end, and for what it felt like an hour. "Hello?" Dean said. "Like," Sebastian finally said, "she's out of her head or gone?" "I mean, she's gone. Literally gone. We took our trip. She got attacked by some version of a lion, and when I came back, she was gone." "What? What are you saying?" "She's fucking gone, subby. I came back and she never did. Got it?" What? If you say what one more fucking time, I swear I'm gonna..." "What were your intentions going in, man? Seriously." "What's with that fucking question? My intentions were... Well, I wanted us to... Bro, Dean, I told you to only do that shit with someone you trust. And I told you to go in with pure intentions. If your intentions were fucked up, your trip was gonna be fucked up." "That still doesn't explain where the fuck she is." "Where the fuck is she?" "Well, wherever your mind took her, dude. I mixed those shrooms with some powder that was found in a case of the archaeology department exhumed from Mexico. I don't know what the powder was. Me and Tammy from archaeology, we tested it on ourselves, and I realized it had an intense hallucinogenic side effect. So I used it to cultivate with the psilocybin shrooms that I was growing. We took the shrooms after and had some vivid trips, but we had some pure intentions. There were a few negative vibes going in, but nothing so intense like what you had. How do you get her back? Or how do I get her back? I don't know if you can, bro. I really don't. What if what if I go in with a weapon, kill that fucking lion and save her? I don't know, man. The intention is still there. Who knows what would happen if you brought in a weapon? Well, I gotta do something. How many you got left? 2. Fuck, bro. Maybe you should just lay off it. Just walk away and pretend this shit didn't happen? What do I tell her family? Just say she ran away. Pigs will keep you under suspicion for a while, but if they can't find the body... Are you fucking insane? No, but dude, what else can you do? Maybe if we both went in, maybe then we could, I don't know, rescue her. No way, dude. I ain't stepping into that negative vibe. Motherfucker. Sorry, bro. You got yourself into this, I told you. Fuck you. Dean threw his phone and it shattered against the wall. His back itched with the wound and the blood that trickled down his spine. He looked over at the oil painting and the sandwich baggie that held the 2 purple mushrooms. Ooh, it is dry in here. He walked over and sat down in the chair and stared into the oil painting. Again, the extreme colors flooded his head, and he buckled onto the floor when the imaginary ice pick jabbed into his forehead. It happened in waves, and he wondered if he was ever going to come out of this. Stop, he bellowed. Stop this shit right fucking now. But it didn't stop. For the first time, it lingered, and Dean thought his head was going to split in 2, gushing out the pineal gland of his brain. Dreaming was a dangerous game when you got a mix of psilocybin and some Incan Mayan voodoo dust fairies floating around in your frontal lobe, granting wishes to your every thought, shooting through the synapses of your mind. There was an explosion of rainbows and stars. There were surreal constellations in here. But they began to flow in a rhythmic pattern, and soon those stars were just reflections on a giant cosmic river. He floated amongst the current, waves splashing against his body. Soon there were giant sea turtles made up of those same stars, and they were swimming alongside him. He could feel their shells rubbing up against him. He began to feel a strong sense of peace. Am I dead? He whispered to the turtle next to him. Or is this a dream? Who are you to decide what is real and what is alive? It said. You are but a man with a tiny man brain. You enslave yourself with the measurement of time. The concept of reality and fantasy, putting everything into a box. His head began to throb again. He paddled his arms through the sea of stars and came upon another sea turtle. Why are there no straight answers? He whispered to the new turtle. Why are questions always answered with more questions? Tiny man brain, it said with a bit of a chuckle. You ask such irrelevant questions when you are swimming through a sea of answers. We are here because you are here. Everything in your tiny world is here because you are here. Stop this. His head began throbbing again. God damn it, stop this. If you want this to stop, then just quit swimming. But I'll drown. Will you? What do you mean, will I? Of course I will. Then I guess you'll drown. Then I guess you're dreaming. Then I guess you're dead. Then I guess you're... Stop this shit right fucking now. He was on the floor again of his apartment, clad in his Perry Ellis underwear and a layer of clammy sweat. He got up on all fours and looked around the room. The mushrooms were still there. The sun had gone away. He wondered how much time had passed. You enslave yourself with the measurement of time. Fucking turtles, he thought. He saw his phone smashed on the floor. There won't be any measurement of time now. It's just him in a one-room apartment and 2 mushrooms waiting to take him into an oil painting. He sat down in the chair and pulled a mushroom out of the baggie. He looked into the painting with its simple shapes and colors, knowing that somewhere in those layers of pigmented oil was a lion in wait. I go in, he said to the mushroom. I go in with the intention of rescuing Stacy Henderson. I go in with pure mind and heart. I, Dean Lohner, go in with pure mind and heart. I will succeed and bring her home. He put the entire mushroom into his mouth. He closed his eyes, and then within a matter of seconds, the intense rainbow flooded his vision and pierced his mind. He felt himself gritting his teeth to the point of them crunching under pressure. Wind was going from searing hot to intense cold. It hit him in waves. Just before he thought his skin would peel off him, there was a loud popping sound, and then a thick, hot air hit his lungs and burned his skin. He landed heavily on familiar canary yellow sand. Dean, came a weak female voice. Dean, are you there? Stacy, he yelled. He stood up and looked up to where the oasis stood. The palm trees and the ferns were still. The silence was almost deafening. Somewhere in the foliage, Stacy lay wounded. He was too late. She had already been attacked, and she lay bleeding somewhere. Dean, she spoke up, stay where you are. Stacy, where are you? He said, climbing the stone steps. This is a trap. There's a lion lying in wait for you. Honey, I'm going to find you and bring you home. I don't think you'll be able to get to me. He's somewhere nearby, and he's waiting to pounce on you. Of course, there were no branches or any type of weapons lying around. He thought perhaps he should have tried to bring a weapon. He wasn't expecting this. Keep talking so I can find you. He was up near the tiny jungle of vegetation. The greens of the plants were such an intense green he couldn't see into the jungle. Please be careful, Dean, she uttered. As he got closer to her voice, he heard the rumbling of a great chest, a low growl coming from a giant cat. He stopped and picked up a large rock. Oh, gonna brain the kitty cat, are you? His mind spoke up. I was wondering when you were gonna show up, he spat. Seriously, you're fucking insane if you think you can take that thing on. It's got to weigh at least a ton. You got any better ideas? You should have listened to Subby. You should have just walked away. We don't fucking play like that, and you know it. The cat's growls were getting louder. He could tell it was close, and he kept the stone ready. Dean, be careful, Stacy uttered. We can still cut and run, you know. If you aren't going to come up with a better plan, shut your hole. Dean, it's moving. I can hear it. Dean closed in on Stacy's location and saw her lying in a pool of her own blood. She had a lot of lacerations on her and a puncture wound on her head. Ah, fuck, Stacy. As Dean bent over to check on Stacy, the lion leapt from its hiding place, and it just missed him. It landed solidly on the other side of him and roared. "Come on, you son of a bitch!" he screamed, wielding the stone like a bludgeon. The cat pounced again, claws extended and aiming for his face. He struck it with the stone, and it screeched and rolled onto the ground. It shook it off its wound and painted the side of Dean's face with its blood. It arched its back and lips pulled back, revealing an impossible number of fangs. He saw that he had knocked out a couple of them with his rock. "Stacy," he said without taking his eyes off the lion, "I'm going to lure this thing away from you. Can you get away to safety?" "I think so," she said, uncertain. "Please, be careful." He backed slowly towards the watering hole. The lion took a few unsuccessful swipes at him with its claws. As the lion's attention was drawn towards him, Stacy crawled slowly and painfully out of the bush and onto the stone steps leading downwards. "What the fuck are you doing?" his mind asked. "What do you see in that pond over there?" Dean's still staring down at the lion. "Water. What else am I supposed to see?" "Look again, buddy boy. There's more than just water in there." "I don't see any—" "Wait a minute. I see. Oh, you cunning motherfucker. There are crocodiles in that water. Large, ferocious crocodiles, with piranhas that haven't eaten in months, waiting to chew on some meat." "Yeah, but how are we going to—" The lion pounced. Dean jumped up as well. He struck the lion in the face and used the momentum to steer the lion's inertia into the pond. It snarled and then landed just on the edge of the bank. It quickly got on all fours and was ready for another assault. "We fucked up." "Did we?" The lion's eyes got wide and its face went from rage to fear, cutting it off in mid-roar. A crocodile had latched onto its back ankle and snapped the tiny bones with its prehistoric jaws. The lion let out a roar and dropped to the ground as the croc pulled it towards the water. Another snap, and it closed its maw on the lion's hindquarters. The lion screeched, and the reptile began to go into its death roll, flipping the lion over end. It clawed frantically at the sand, trying to stop its demise. "Jesus, I almost feel sorry for him." As the lion sank into the waters, the piranhas began to feed in a crimson, bubbling display of gore. The lion's roar got weaker, and when it was no more. Dean ran over to Stacy, who looked worse than before. "Hold on," he said, holding her to his chest. "I'm so sorry for this. I'm so fucking sorry." He held her for what seemed to be an eternity. The sun went down and came back up again. Still he held her tight against himself. Days and nights kept passing, and he kept hoping that they would be home. He opened his eyes, and they were lying in their bed. Dusk was heavy outside, and the smells of his apartment came flooding back. His head aching, he loosened his grip on Stacy. She was home. "Honey," he whispered. "Honey, we're back. I got you back, just like I promised." There was no answer. "Then I guess you're dead," came the voice of the turtle. Dean laid her down softly on the bed. He kissed her cooling cheeks that were stained with blood, that had stopped leaking from her head wounds. He pulled the covers up over her head and walked back to the table. There was one mushroom. There was a pool full of man-eating fish and a large crocodile with orange fur caught in its teeth, somewhere in a painting sitting on his table. "This is what I deserve," he said to himself. "Just like that? We went through all of that just to end it." "Yep. You're an asshole. You know that? The alternative is having the cops find us with a dead Stacy and we go to prison for life." "Okay. Let's eat this fucking thing." And that, my friends, is the end of Love and Lions. So hopefully y'all liked it. Hey Kyle, glad you made it even though you're late. Yeah, so tomorrow night we are going to be reading chapters 8 and 9, and then we're going to wrap it up on Tuesday, chapter 10. And yeah, it's going to be quite a long story. That one might go 2 hours. Tonight went just over an hour, so not bad. Two stories in 1 hour. So thanks again for tuning in and patience. Thanks to Stephanie for waking me up because I didn't sleep at all last night, and I tried taking a nap, and I do really horrible when I do that. Anyway, she got me up so I could be here on time, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, so to speak. I'm gonna have to get a humidifier because it is really dry in here. My throat's drying out. But yeah, thanks again, you guys. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for liking my stuff. Thanks for following me and putting up with my bloopers and my blunders and everything else. And thank you very much for watching, enjoying, buying, and reading my books. All of that. I really appreciate it. And I hope you all had a good weekend. And we shall talk again tomorrow night at the same time, same Brad channel. All right. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great night. Peace out. Deuces.